that's interesting, Rebecca, saying maybe there are more women who are sex addicts who just don't want to talk about it. Why have you decided to be so public about it?
I think because there is so much stigma attached to it, and I feel that if it can happen to me, then it could happen to anybody.
And when did it start happening to you, in your opinion? When did you start thinking this is, you know, I have an unhealthy relationship with sex?
I think while I was actually going through it, because for me it lasted around 3 months, I wasn't really aware that it was an addiction, and it wasn't until it stopped that I realised how bad
So
it had been.
when you say you weren't aware it was an addiction, how though did your behaviour change? I mean, what were you doing? You know, I just want to quantify this, you know, to understand why you didn't realise it was an addiction.
Well, I was already going through depression at the time, so I was in a fragile state of mind, and I felt very isolated because of my depression anyway. And so I'd shut myself off to the outside world, more or less. And I thought that maybe I was just going stir crazy, because it just became, there were obsessive thoughts. Towards the end, I did actually feel like my whole body was craving it as well.
When you say you shut yourself off to the outside world, that's interesting, because, you know, most people think sex addict, or you must have been having multiple affairs and sexual relations. So this was within your own relationship?
Yes, this was within my own relationship, and although I was aware that I was having these feelings, I didn't realise it was an addiction at the time, and I felt very ashamed that it was all I could think about. So
in an average day, how many times did you crave sex? How many times were you having sex? And your partner, husband at the time, I mean, I'm just thinking a lot of men would be going, how lovely.
Yes, he did at first, yeah. It was literally all I could think about. And
you were doing it every time you thought about it?
Well, no, because we did work together from home, which was very, very useful, very handy.
Rebecca, look, how many times a day? That's what we're asking.
At least 5.
5?
At least, and that wasn't enough.
At least?
At least, because I only actually got relief from the obsessive thoughts during the act of sex, and then as soon as it finished, it was back on my mind again.
Right,
So
I can understand that's sort of quite practical. I'm going to do this. It's like an itch you have to scratch or whatever.
Yes, yeah.
But were you enjoying it?
No.
No?
No.
In what way were you not enjoying it then?
Before I had the addiction, sex with my partner was a pleasurable experience, but I didn't find any pleasure during the addiction itself. It was as if I had to have the hit, and then as soon as it was over, I was obsessing about it again.
So are you saying you weren't then romantically involved? You weren't, it was just, like Eamon said, an itch you had to scratch?
Yes,
like your body,
yeah.
it's some obsession, you said, I have to do this.
Problems.
When you say then this was sex addiction, were you diagnosed with that? Did you eventually go and seek medical advice? How do you realise that it wasn't your libido coming back after depression, that it had tipped into an addiction?
I have since spoken with a psychotherapist who confirmed that it definitely was sex addiction. I don't actually like the term sex addiction itself, because unlike other addictions, like substance addiction, for example, alcohol addiction, I don't feel that it's the same thing. I felt it was more of an obsessive compulsive behaviour.
Would you agree with that?
Doctor, why was she able to walk away from... Because if you were addicted to drugs or alcohol,
I mean,
you find it a lot more
the key
difficult.
thing in this story, and is that sexual behavior which is designed to anesthetize a negative feeling state, for example, depression, which is very common in your story, it's an escape. It's a temporary escape mechanism from difficult feeling states. The ones that we see in the practice are loneliness, depression, stress, boredom, and shame. And one of those or all of those contribute to the need to escape.
And what is it about sex that people turn to? Why sex?
Well, you have it with you all the time. It's accessible, it's available. It doesn't smell on your breath afterward. You know, it's sort of hidden, and it's much more hidden than others. And also, it ties into a biological underpinning as well.
But how would people know the difference between a high sex drive and an addiction. So somebody might be watching now saying, well, my partner, or I've got a high sex drive, I'd like to do it 2 or 3 times a day. How would you know that that's an addiction or just a high sex drive?
Well, I mean, I share the view that actually addiction isn't always a helpful term. I just talk about problematic patterns of sexual behavior. And it's a problem when it becomes a problem, if it's a problem.
How would you describe where you're at now?
Well, I'm back to normal. It's not an obsession for me anymore. I have a perfectly normal sex life with my new partner, which is why I don't like the fact that it's associated with addiction, because it's something that you can go back to and lead a normal life. Whereas alcoholics, for example, if they have to stop drinking alcohol completely.
Do you feel, whatever that is to you, you now have a normal sex life that you're
Yes.
happy with, the amount of times,
Yes.
and you're more engaged with your partner?
Yes.